Hi, everybody. So my name's Brian Rose. I'm the city planner for the city of Gallatin. Recently hired back in January, so forgive me if I don't know everything about the city yet, but working towards it. So we'll get there. I wanted to just do a quick introduction tonight. This is our ZoCo planning meeting that we're talking about our zoning ordinance, and we want to get all of your input on this. So I'm glad that you've all taken some time out of your busy lives to come and share it with us tonight. ZoCo is just short for zoning code, and that was a catchy little phrase that some of our folks here at the city came up with. And our consultants are here tonight that are helping us with this project. They are from Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, shorter known as TPUDC. And I'm really excited to be working with them. I've actually worked with them in the past, in my past planning life. And so got a little flavor of how they worked and really was excited that the city had already chosen to work with them before I got here and get to work with some friends from the past. Brian Wright is going to be our presenter tonight. He is the principal and co-founder of TPUDC. His dad, Bill Wright, is his legal guy, and he's here as well. And Anna Blevins is our project manager on this. So they are the three from the team tonight. I'm going to just go ahead and turn it over to Brian and let him get started. So
great.
Give him a warm round of applause.
Oh, yes. I got mine. All right. Wow. Sounds like some works really well. Thank you. So I think what I just heard Brian say was, if you guys don't like what he says, it's not my fault because they hired him before they hired me. Yeah, so anyway, but yeah, so I'm Brian Wright. I'm the principal of Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, and here with part of my team to help you all through a process to update your zoning ordinance, which I'm really excited to see how many people have come out tonight, because a lot of times talking about zoning isn't the most exciting thing that people want to spend their evening doing. So we will do our best to make it exciting for you as you go through the process. Can I have the PowerPoint here? Great, thanks. All right. So introduction. So I'm Brian, and I have Bill, who's my dad, and then Jessica, who's one of our directors, will be working on this along with Anna, and then some of our other planners and graphic designers and our illustrator. And so I get to stand up here and talk with all of you a lot, but a lot of people are doing stuff in the background that will hopefully get us where we need to be as we go through the process. So fortunately for me, on this project, I didn't have to get on an airplane to come see you because we just are over in Franklin. And so drove over this afternoon, and I'll be able to sleep in my bed tonight. So that's really nice because we get to work all over the country. We do zoning ordinances and comprehensive plans. We also do work for developers as well. And so trying to understand kind of, a community that if you're, needing to, like over in Nolensville, we've been working on their zoning ordinance, and they're looking at their finances, and they're like, okay, well, we can't not grow, so what do we do? Because financially we need to, and so how do we figure out like what is the small town charm that they're looking for there? We're working in Fairview right now as well, and so they're very early on in their growth cycle, but tons of growth pressure, and so they're like, okay, well, right now it looks like there's lots of woods and things and farms, and so how do we preserve and protect those things while creating a community that we want to see? If we're going to have development, let's have it on our terms is kind of the way that they're approaching it, and so we're helping them with that process as well. But we get to work in all kinds of places, and some of them are far away and very different than the places we get to work around here. Some of them are nearby, as I just mentioned, but it's nice because we're able to see what other communities are doing well, and sometimes, most importantly, what they're not doing well, so we can bring that to wherever we're working next. And it's like, well, the one thing you want to make sure you don't do if this is your goal is this. So we'll bring some of those to you as we go through the process. But these are some of the projects we work on from Birmingham, which is my hometown, Well, they do lots of work in New England for some reason. I don't know why they like us up there, but I think they like the southern thing. And again, as I mentioned, and we did the zoning code for Franklin too, not too long ago, and the historic district guidelines. So, while we have this sort of wealth of experience of things that we do and places we've worked on and projects we've done, for us, we bring that sort of national and local regional expertise, but we really, most important part of our team member is the community, sort of partnering, going through a process, getting all of y'all's input to see what it is that's important to you so that we can make sure that that shows up in the zoning ordinance as we update it. So one of the approaches that we take is really starting to look at the whole community, all the different aspects of, different preferences of different people. Some people want to have, farmland. Some people want to live as close to the square as possible and everything in between. And so some people want to live in a new subdivision, all on and on and on. So looking at those sorts of things, and then, as I mentioned, the economics and the utilities and transportation networks. And once we look at all of those things together, then we're able to start to say, okay, well, if we make this decision related to zoning, then it can have that effect or impact on these other things. And so we're able to sort of better make decisions together as we move forward. So once we recognize those connections, we can start to come up with innovative solutions to whatever the challenges are that you all are interested in solving. So when you get on an airplane, right, I like this image because you don't quite know what's happening here, whether these guys are just sort of banking in for a landing or if they're, oh my gosh, we're crashing, what do we do? The way I think about zoning is, here we are. What do you think about zoning? We're here to talk about zoning. Well, many of you may have never opened the zoning ordinance in your life. You may not have studied zoning, and so it may be a new concept to you. So I think about when I get on an airplane. When I get on a plane, I need to know a few things. Where am I trying to go? Like, what's my destination? What time is my flight? Where's my seat? And where's the bathroom? But I never feel like I need to ask for the instruction manual, right? Maybe the little information in the seat back, envelope thing that tells you how to escape or whatever. But I'm never like, how do you fly this thing? So what I want to do as we go through the process is make sure you don't feel the pressure to become an expert on zoning. There may be things that you're super passionate about. Dig into those as much as you want to. You may want to become an expert in the zoning process, and that's okay too. But a lot of times when we're doing this, it's like I feel like people feel a lot of pressure as a citizen to come and really become an expert in this thing that takes a long time to be expert in. Hopefully through this process, we will make it where it's easily digestible to you and you're able to dig in and dive in as much as you want. But I just want to share that with you as a bit of advice as we go forward. So for us, whenever we start working on a new project, we start building on a firm foundation. So we look at the past, right? So we look at, we study the history of this place. We roam around, we look and see what are the places that people love the most. How did this place come to be? How did it grow over time? And how do we find ourselves in the situation that we're in today? And some places we go and they love it, and all they're worried about is kind of keeping things as it is. Other places we go, they go, man, we really blew it over the years. And so how do we fix these things that we've goofed up on? So we study the past. We look at things like your comprehensive plan, your current zoning ordinance, of course. And the comprehensive plan is really, sort of a foundational document. Now, in most places we work, they don't have a comprehensive plan that's relatively new, like you all do. And so a lot of times we're having to go through part of, sort of doing the process that maybe you all participated in during the comprehensive plan, visioning and getting your input on stuff. Other places we go, they say, well, yeah, we know we have this new comprehensive plan. I wasn't involved in that. I didn't really know anything about it, or I'm not quite sure how I feel about what the results were. And so we go through that process, and so we'll try to understand what the ideas and the thoughts are, but recognizing that the comprehensive plan is an adopted document that sets out the vision for the future. It's a long-range policy document, and so there are certain things that, unless you do a comprehensive plan amendment, we end up needing to sort of follow the direction of the comprehensive plan. Normally, comprehensive plans are a bit general, though. They're kind of high level, which is the idea. You cast a high level vision. There are some things in yours that are a bit specific, and so we'll sort of see how that all ties into zoning as we go. But it's really to provide guidance for growth and development and conservation for the future. And so there are, if you haven't taken a look at the comprehensive plan yet or weren't involved in that process, you can go online and take a look, and it's kind of broken down. But I'll give you this sort of Cliff's Notes version. So here are the goals that are stated in the comprehensive plan right now. So planned growth, efficient transportation, economic opportunity, natural beauty, community focus, and defining spaces. And so obviously each of those goals has quite a bit of sort of beneath it, and then, as you sort of zero in on it all. And so, but these are the kind of the cornerstones of what it says and kind of we'll approach the zoning. We have been looking at and studying and understanding. You have right now in your comprehensive plan this community character map, and it breaks the city into these different these colors, which are character areas or districts. I can't remember how it's referred to exactly. But each of the different colors represents a different character, or the kind of the way, the look and the feel, maybe some of the uses or densities or whatever that are found in those areas. And so that's kind of how that lays out. And then as we go through our process, we'll be looking at each of these different colored areas on the ground and understanding more about what it means and how the zoning, either currently, the current zoning, reflects that or doesn't. And where it doesn't, we have to update and tweak it so that it does and move forward in that way. Then there is also a map in there called the Anticipated Degree of Change map. And so this is not a lot of comprehensive plans have this in it. So this is kind of a nice one for, Cliff's Notes version again. So you find sort of where you are if you're interested in, what's to become of your property. And you see, okay, well, what does each of these colors mean and what zone am I in? And sustain means minimal change, nurture is focus, support, and accelerate means proactive change. And so we're going to look at all that. But just as a preview, when we are thinking about, how to think about change or not, we tend to take areas that are what we would call sort of stable neighborhoods where just a typical subdivision where people have moved in there and they're not interested in seeing something new or different and all that, and kind of try to leave it alone. And so as we go through this process that I'll talk more about here in a bit, we'll look at areas that you all want us to focus on where you might want to see some change, and areas that you want to preserve as well. So one thing we never hear is when you have a great little historic downtown, people are like, you know what, we really need to mix it up and change that a bit. I'm not quite sure I'm into that. Let's do something different, right? They used to say that in the 60s and 70s, and so you get like a conventional suburban-style mall in a downtown. But today, not so much. We're a bit more sort of respectful of our historic areas. But anyway, so we've been looking at this map as well, and we'll continue to do so. So that's comprehensive plan, so that's higher level. So now we're getting into zoning, right? So we're going to, and please forgive me, if you are experts in zoning, I'm just going to pretend like you aren't, right? So I'm going to give you a quick 101 here. So basically the city uses zoning to group the city into different use districts primarily. And so it has rules and regulations about what you can and can't do within those districts, right? But it doesn't cause something to happen. And so a lot of times, you'll see like, oh, well, it's this color. Or as you're going through a zoning update, if a color changes on a map and they say, oh, well, here's what it says it could be. And then the property owner says, well, I'm not trying to do that. I don't want to do that. And you say, okay, that's fine. At some point you may want to. This change may add value to your property or whatever the case may be. And so that's a discussion you have, but it doesn't mean you have to go do something right away. So zoning can give you a place like this, or let's say a place like your downtown. Even though your downtown was probably built before there was zoning here, they used to just know how to do stuff really well. Now we have to have rules and regulations. And so zoning could also give you this. And so far in our work all around the country for nearly 20 years, we've never had anybody say, we want that. But somehow the folks who live there got that. And there were rules and regulations that allowed that, maybe even required it to happen when somebody was developing their property. Now, I'm not hearing any, I'm not seeing any show of hands of people who want that. So we'll assume that you probably aren't thinking about that. But here's how that happened, right? So zoning, conventional zoning, kind of the old way we used to do zoning, was to separate uses one from the next in a different pod. So this might be a commercial or shopping pod, and then this might be an office pod. And here you might have a residential pod, or single family, and then this might be a residential but multifamily pod, and then this might be a school pod or factory, either way. But the way they used to do it, like they did when they built the most beloved parts of nearly any city in the country, was the uses weren't so focused on being separated. They worried about the actual character of the place. And you think about any downtown building, how many different things happened in that building over the years. This building was built, it was the old livery stable, right? And there were horses in there. And the next thing you know, now it's City Hall for a while, and then it becomes the general store and the mercantile, or whatever the case may be. And so things change over time. But the reason why it was okay and it worked with the buildings next to it was because of the scale, the setbacks, the massing, the materiality of it, sort of the architecture of things. And so there were ways that through the physical form of the place, it didn't matter so much what went into a building. Now, that said, today, sometimes we hear people say, wouldn't it be nice if I could walk to a little, corner store or something, or if I could walk to a coffee shop or whatever in my neighborhood? In a neighborhood that doesn't have one, right? But it's not often said. And so most people are like, yeah, it's okay to separate those uses, even if it could fit in character-wise with my neighborhood, because my neighborhood was built in 1965, and they weren't really thinking about mixing up stuff like that. And so if people want that, that's okay in a different area, but not in my neighborhood. But the things that they would do to make great places is they would make them walkable. They would make them compact, so rather than just sort of spreading out everywhere, they would preserve farmland, they would preserve woodland, and they would have development that was a bit more dense. And so they would also have a mix of uses, like I was just talking about. So you could walk to some of your daily needs instead of having to get in the car for every single thing you wanted to do, which then, as we were just talking about earlier, you start maybe see a little traffic here and there, I don't know. And then they were varied. They would have a variety of different housing types and sizes and different things like that. So things are kind of transitioned away from that after World War II, and we really got focused on our cars and on driving all around. And again, that's how I grew up. I grew up in a neighborhood, it's conventional subdivision from the 60s probably, and cul-de-sacs all over the place, and it didn't bear any resemblance to the historic neighborhoods that everybody loved. And I had a great time growing up there, and it was wonderful. But also in my town, there wasn't a historic part at all. And so those who liked the sort of walkable neighborhoods didn't even have that choice in the city I grew up in. And so a lot of times, as you'll see here, people are interested in having something for everyone. And let's see how that works. So in our discussions with different stakeholders so far, some of the things we've heard, we asked, what do you like most about Gallatin? People talked about lakefront, historical sites, rural and agricultural lands, downtown historic square, and the courthouse building, of course. Parks and playgrounds, small town atmosphere, lower cost of living than surrounding areas, population size, and then the ability to support new development. We said, what are the challenges? Traffic congestion. We heard about growth outpacing infrastructure, lack of housing variety, and then higher housing costs. So even though in the last slide I said, people said, sort of the relative affordability, it is relative, and things are going up even here. And so we asked, what should some of the goals be as we update the zoning ordinance? And this is just a starting point. So keep these in your mind. So you may disagree with some of these, or you may have others to add to it. So we'll talk about that at the end. So better organization. If you've looked at it, spending time with the zoning ordinance, as they all are, all the older zoning ordinances, they are difficult to use most often. So people want it to be better organized and user-friendly. They want it to be searchable, to have more graphics so you can understand instead of like a long list of words and paragraphs and all that. Let me just show me a picture. I can understand that better. That's how I am. have better architectural standards, good character, and through this process we'll talk about what does that mean? What is the character of Gallatin, and what is, of the small town charm we heard about in a couple of slides ago. Remove contradictory elements. There are currently things that sort of contradict each other if you look in this section and that section. Updating definitions, removing loopholes. Nobody likes loopholes because it means that you don't know what to expect when development's going to come. Somebody got around something that you all thought they couldn't. So that's something we heard about. Remove the need for variances. A lot of times when we see places where there's just tons of variances granted all the time, that means there's a problem with the zoning ordinance. It's either that or the building and development community just don't really care what the zoning ordinance says, and they want to do something different than that. And so we got to figure out kind of which of those things it is, and then if there, like in some communities, like I said before, if there's an economic need, then you have to decide, are we willing to be more strict and not allow for those variances, even if that's not what the development or building community want here. So we'll talk through that together as we go through this long process. A revised and efficient process. So if you ever try to submit something and go through the process, it's a bit arduous. Sidewalks and streetscapes, standards for those things. And then providing a variety of housing options. Right now it's a bit limited. And so when you look at what type of housing you get in the community, you have obviously a predominance of single-family detached houses, which is a large preference for a lot of people, especially when you move to a small town like this. But then also too, we hear stories like, well, that's great, and my kids grew up here, and this is wonderful, and now they've gone away to college, and now they've got a great job, and they're wanting to move back, but they can't do the whole single-family big house thing yet, and where do they go? Or my mother-in-law, where does she go? And so a lot of these things that they think through together. So to update the code, we start looking at things like protecting the most loved parts of the city, and so we'll talk to you about what are those most beloved parts. Enhancing areas that need improvement, and you'll identify those areas. And the comp plan will do some of this too, by the way, but we want to, as we go through this process, sort of zero in on the input the comp plan got and be more zoning specific. Creating more predictable outcomes so that, again, every time there's development, you don't have to be afraid of it. And also for the developers too. There's nothing that they hate more than having to go back and try again and try again. And so a lot of times they'll actually do what you want them to do if you just make it easier for them to do it, as opposed to so often it's like, okay, well, we're just going to sort of pound them into submission, and then each time they have to come back, it's costing them money and time, and all of a sudden the project's getting worse and worse and worse and not quite as good as it could have been. So if you give them direction in the beginning, the way you want them to go, it's a lot easier to get them there in the end. I mentioned creating something for everyone, the right place for everything. I'll hear people who say, oh yeah, again, I would love to live in the historic neighborhoods around downtown. All over the country we hear this. Small lot, I don't need much yard. I don't want to maintain that, whatever. And then other people are like, are you kidding me? It could be their brother, right? Are you kidding me? I've got dogs. Where are my dogs going to run? I got to throw the ball for the dogs or whatever. I don't want to see my neighbors. That's just two different preferences, right? And so we want to make sure that you have the ability to respond to whatever it is, wherever it is y'all want to go as a community. Again, a lot of times by making more choices, you're able to make yourself be more economically viable without having to just say, oh, anything goes. We'll take whatever development we get. You can start to mix it up so that you can attract different groups and different types of people at different stages of life to come in, assuming that they're going to come. There may be a strategy in which you don't have to have any new development. We have not seen that yet in the country, because the only other option is really if we actually curtail growth, then we have to raise taxes. And most places we go, and we saw one recently where they just said, yeah, we want to not have as much growth, and we're willing to pay more taxes to do that. It's not normal, but they did it. So I'm going to talk about balancing modes of transportation, right? As we heard in one of those earlier slides, traffic is starting to become a problem. How do we deal with that? Well, if not everybody has to get in the car for everything, if you can bike somewhere, if you can walk somewhere, those sorts of things, then that helps in that regard. And then enhancing economic viability, I just mentioned a minute ago, easier to use and administer, and then preserving floodplains and rural and agricultural lands. And a lot of times we and I'm super interested to learn more about all y'all's shirts, because I was going to say, a lot of times we go to a place where there's like, hey, we want to preserve something or protect something. We say, okay, well, what is that thing? What does that mean? And they said, well, we want more open space, or we want more X, Y, and Z. That it equals essentially less building. And so then we need to get to, well, when you say open space and preserve something, do you mean like you want forest? Do you want to preserve farm? Do you want to preserve 1 acre lots that are neither, not one or the other necessarily, and whatever the case may be. So we want to learn more about that as we go. So we start. The next step would be we get in and we start actually measuring and documenting things and understanding what is the DNA of the community, of these places where you say, oh, this is what we love. We'd like to see more of this, or this is what we don't like. We go in and we look at it, measure. We got measuring wheels. We get on the computer and look at all kinds of stuff and try to figure out, what is that DNA of the thing that people are responding to favorably. Because when you all say, like we saw on one of the earlier slides, somebody said they want to preserve small town charm. That means something different than when they say it in Franklin, or when they say it in Nolansville, or they say it in Fairview, wherever. And so a lot of times we use these words to describe something that's in our head, and actually what's in your head to describe that thing could be totally different than the person who's sitting next to you who's thinking the same thing. We both said we like small town charm, but it means something different to both of us. And so we have to get to the bottom of what it is that it means. And this helps us because we can start to say, oh, well, this area that everyone's responding to really well has these characteristics. And so we'll start to tweak the zoning accordingly. Then we also start to look at the different zoning districts that you have. Most places we go, they have way more zoning districts than they need. They're very, very complicated because what we see sometimes is somebody will have come in and 2 neighbors are fighting. One neighbor has chickens, and the other neighbor says, this guy's got chicken. Well, more importantly, he has a rooster, right? And they said, well, how big is his lot? Well, it's 1.5 acres. And you say, okay, great. Well, we'll make a provision in the ordinance that says you can't have chickens unless you have more than 1.5 acres. And now that's in your zoning ordinance. And so you have this one rule that's kind of specific to that instance. And so a lot of times we'll say the same thing. Well, we'll make a zoning district to, I always kind of make the joke, like if you have a B1, Bakery 1, and a Bakery 2, and in Bakery 1 you can sell donuts, which you have over there, and in Bakery 2 you can sell bagels. They're about the same. They're round, and they kind of, the bagel one's hole's not quite as obvious, but they're all about the same. Do you need a special zone for that? And you wouldn't believe the number of zones that we find that are unnecessary. So we look for ways to consolidate that, and then to tie it back into the idea of what is the character of the community. The synoptic surveys that I mentioned, what you all talked about in the comprehensive plan with character, and then what we learned from all of you through this process, what it means to you, what character means to you. And then we translate your existing zoning districts, which you may or may not be familiar with, into districts that represent character and aren't just simply separating uses from one another all the time. Sometimes they will separate them, but that's not the only thing. So, for instance, this is a use table in one of our zoning codes, and it's quite robust. And so what I always say is the approach that we take, and it's contemplated in the comprehensive plan too, is really about the form and the character. And so when you take that approach to zoning, you take the use from the most important thing to like the 6th most important thing. And then in some places, you want to make sure that you are separating. In other places, you realize it's not that important. Then, as I mentioned earlier, the sort of conventional suburban neighborhoods that everybody's like, yeah, we're not interested in seeing anything change. So they go into their districts, and they have their all their different elements of setbacks and heights and things that are documented in a graphical and easy to use way, just like you would in the historic areas or in the areas where for new development. So you could have similar characteristics in a new development from the places that you love the most, instead of it just being anything goes. Then even when we're looking at some of the, like if you have like a business park area or whatever, so you've got these sort of conventional things mixed in with the more traditional things that are sort of character or place-based that are focusing on that. And then in some instances you may see where, this is an example where they wanted to have kind of both on the same development, and they had a big kind of a big box kind of a thing back there in the back, and then out front, up along the main road, they kind of made like a main street, and so you had this sort of walkable thing. So you go park once and do the big box thing, and you can go out and walk along the main street, and so it's kind of what we would call a hybrid type of development between conventional and traditional zoning technique. And then they kind of all come together. So we take, the sort of how we revised the existing code and cleaned it up, adding some new character-based elements, and then that equals sort of the new code. So this is from a much more urban place that we did a project on, but this is like part of their zoning ordinance. You can see how graphical it is, and sort of easy to look at and to read. Lots of white space on the page, and working in communities, and you guys will point us in the right direction, and the comprehensive plan is to a certain extent as well. Where are you all wanting to go in the future? What are those changing preferences that you may have? What are the things you want to keep the same? So obviously, what does the workplace look like these days? That's a huge question. There are lots of places that have office buildings that are empty. They're transforming them into residential, and and even before all of that happened, people were wanting to have more creative workplaces where they could come together and exchange ideas, and so communities were targeting that to try to increase their tax base as well. The idea of a mix of different housing types, this is something that's talked about all around the country. People talk about missing middle. So a lot of times what you find is you'll have plenty of large lot single-family homes, and then you may actually have a good number of sort of dense apartments or whatever the case may be. But all the things that a lot of the historic towns used to have sort of in between those two things, or sort of medium density, medium price, medium scale, have gone away. And so a lot of communities are asking, like, how can we bring back some of these things? And if we say, you know what, we'd like to... a townhouse is a good example, right? So a lot of times townhouses today are sort of townhouse in name, but there's no town because they're just like a bunch of attached houses in a parking lot around them. They forgot the town, right? But the way they used to do them, they could be right next to a grand mansion in the historic downtown. They could be next to the best soda shop in town where somebody lived above, and all that stuff. And so how do you maybe you want to add something like that? Maybe you want to do little cottage courts or tiny houses or all of these different things, and we'll work through that together as you guys talk about what you're interested in. And then we also will be looking at what you already have a lot of. So, for instance, in Franklin, there was lots of discussion about Franklin's kind of known for having these sort of subdivisions and all that, and we're not really in favor of any kind of density and all that. And so, okay, fair enough. And then we looked at how much of the city was built out and how much of the land we're actually talking about as for, was available for new development. And so what we realized is like 85 or 90% of the city would be the conventional large lot, single family subdivision that people loved and held on to. And then they could consider not even just exclusively doing things that were a bit more dense, but having a mix of those even within the same development. Because so often you see in a new subdivision, every single thing is the same. Every lot is the same. Every house, they may have a little bit different architecture on them, but they're all about the same size. So when you go in there, it's just like repetitious, all down the road. When you walk into a historic area, the thing you notice is things are mixed up, the sizes and stuff, and it makes it so interesting. Developers are doing that today in new developments. And so, again, a lot of times when people say, oh, well, I'm thinking about, let's see, pick on the townhouse again. Townhouses. I go, oh, gosh, hundreds of townhouses all packed in. I was like, no. What if there were 10 or 20 right here, and then around them was single family, and then medium-sized lots, and around them was even bigger single family, kind of like you used to see the way things would grow. And there's a park in the middle that the townhouses are around. So we'll walk through that together. As we learn more about preservation, it seems like I'm always surprised some places we work don't have really a good sense of how to preserve anything. And so we'll learn more about what prompted you all to get shirts made, and try to see how we can really target those things that are important to you all, and figure out how to make it happen. Agriculture, again, small town charm. Most of the time when people talk about small town charm, there's also not only the building part of it, but there's the edge of building, which in a small town used to have been agriculture, right? And so how do you, if we have agricultural areas, how do you allow that to either stay agriculture, or, because a lot of times when people say, yeah, we want to preserve the farmland, and the farmer says, no one asked me about that because that is my retirement plan and that's my kid's inheritance. So what do we do about that? And so how do we find a way that somebody can take their farm and do something with it, and it doesn't just have to end up being a subdivision that everyone's, including the person who sold it, the farmer, is sort of moaning and sad about, right? So there's ideas around this that we'll share as we go through this process together. The idea of, you may have heard the concept of an agrihood, where you mix sort of new neighborhoods and agriculture and kind of weave them in together. Some really exciting things being done around that. And it allows for, an instance where somebody, we're working on one now, one of our private development projects, and the family's been on the land for 135 years. And they thought their only option was to just sell it off to a developer, and they'd never be able to drive past again because they'd be too sad. And we worked on a plan and figured out how we could make it continue on, still being productive agriculture, 50% of the land in conservation and agriculture, and making real villages on the rest of it. And one of the senior-most family members said, you know what? If we can do this, I actually might like to move back to the farm. And I'm like, that was amazing, right? And so there's things that can be done with this as well. But we need to make sure that we are creating a document, a code that works for the policymakers, that works for the community, citizens, for businesses. It's past several years have been tricky for businesses in a lot of places, so I got to do that. For people at all stages of life. And for visitors, you all are a place where people actually want to come visit, which isn't something that a lot of places can say. So we want to make sure we don't goof that up. And then also, and this is sometimes a hard slide for people, it's something that works for developers. And the reason that I say that is every single thing that was built, the things you love and the things that you hate in the city since it was founded, were built by people for a reason, for economic reason, right? Now, the increment of development that we do today is a bit different than it once was when we made some of the most beloved parts of the city. It's not impossible to still make places that people love. And so, insofar as you're going to grow, we want to sort of embrace the development community, bring them to the table, bring folks who don't want to have growth and development to the table, and see if we can figure out what are the things that the development community is doing that's making people not want to have more of it. And a lot of times, the development community will say, okay, wow, I didn't realize you had such a preference. I knew you came and complained about things that I did, and you told me to get out of town or whatever, but I didn't ever know what you wanted instead of what I was doing. And I can do that. And others will say, that doesn't fit my model. I can't do that. And so they'll fight, and if we write the ordinance in such a way that doesn't follow their model, they'll say, we don't like this ordinance. So we have to kind of find that, hopefully that common ground where we have something that works for everyone as we go. But most importantly, it has to have the essence of Gallatin. One of the things that I always worry about, because we work all over the country, is that I'm going to come give you some alien virus of the, inject this code to you that we got, oh shoot, we forgot that was from, South Dakota. And we pat that bit in there, and that's totally not Gallatin. And so we want to make sure that what we're doing is representing all of you, and this is the Gallatin Code. We count on you all to help us do that. You have to hold us accountable as we go. Just remember and keep in mind that the way that we take our charge, we think our goal here is to help you all put into a zoning ordinance, again, as we start off, a very dry kind of a thing, what you want to see in the future. So when you see something in there, if you don't like it, don't assume it's in there because I like it, right? Assume that it's in there because I didn't understand what it is y'all wanted to see. Assume that we just need to tweak something and it can be adjusted. But at the end of the day, we really do take the public process very seriously. It's one of the reasons why we get hired to work all over the country. We're known for our public process and having the community. We had people who show up in the town that we worked in with Brian years ago. I remember the very first meeting like this. Somebody came in and said, I think I know that you are an agent of the United Nations and you are here to take my property rights. I was like, challenge accepted, right? Because I knew, of course, that wasn't true. And I was so looking forward to getting to know Donna Pinard. I will never forget her name because the town we were working in was Pinardville. And just getting to know her and understand and see what she was concerned about, how she got that idea, that I was there for that reason, and I love that. So no matter how challenging or how concerning or anything you feel when you walk in this room, I'm just here to listen to what you're saying, to try to give you some ideas and some thoughts and some feedback. That said, you may say something. Let's say we go, hey, what do you all think we ought to do? Well, you know what we need to make sure we do is have zoning so that we can have a Space Needle on the courthouse square. Probably not going to do that, right? We're probably going to get some guidance from others that say, nah, that's not going to work. So when you give us ideas and feedback and thoughts, what we start saying is, we note it, right? So we're going to be taking notes on all this stuff. And what we hope is that at the end of this all, you'll see something that you contributed in this. Not everything, right? But something that you contributed. And you go, okay, good. I was heard. This reflects what I'm looking for. This comes to as close to small town charm as is possible based on the fact that I'm not the only person who lives in this city, and people have different ideas than me. But one of the reasons why we like to do the public process is that so that people can hear what they think. They know what they think. They can hear what the person next to them thinks and all the other people who want to talk. And a lot of times people are like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Not everyone agrees with me, right? Because a lot of times you hang out with people who do agree with you. And so kind of getting to the bottom of that. And so that's part of our job is to help you all navigate those difficult discussions and conversations. I think that is, timelines and next steps. Okay. We'll do this and then we'll get to Q&A. I'll quit talking, I promise. Thank you. Plan-A-Palooza will be coming up July 12th through 15th. And it does say plan, but it is still coding and zoning. It just sort of has a better flow, Plan-A-Palooza. But it'll be a multi-day public process we'll go through together. After we get lots and lots of input through that multi-day process with all of you and hopefully others and neighbors will come with you, we will start drafting the first draft of the new ordinance. We will deliver that to the planning department. They'll take a look at it, make sure we hadn't done anything crazy or missed something major, and it's ready to go out to all of you. They'll give us any edits if they do have any. And then we will start working on the public draft, which will be distributed to the community. And you guys can spend a month reading it, looking at it, all of it if you want, or whatever sections you're most interested in. And then you have opportunity to give your comments to staff. They'll distill all the comments and organize them for us, and then we'll take those comments and incorporate the ones that they send to us and start working on the final draft document. And then we will come back. Oh, I skipped there. We'll have an open house to sort of introduce you to the public draft as well. And then we'll have the final ordinance, hopefully, sort of end of spring 2025. Usually it's a pretty linear process. But sometimes, depending on the layers of complexity of all the things that need to happen, or if we have competing interests or whatever, we have to figure out. But hopefully, we want to do it quickly because I know that one of the things that people don't love is how long your past planning document took to get through the process. And so we probably had people who moved out during the process and moved in and all that. And so we want to get your zoning ordinance in place relatively quickly, because that is actually what protects you and puts in place the rules and regulations that will reflect the vision that we all come up with through this process together. So I mentioned the Planapalooza. The reason it has such a goofy name is because it's actually a lot of fun, even though it is zoning. There'll be different types of discussions, and we will have one more presentation at the beginning, but we will then move into a hands-on workshop, and you all will actually get around maps around the table and start marking up things and giving us thoughts, and very directly we'll have different types of insert website. Oh, there's a website too. It's ZoCo and so you can go online and give input as well. But the most fun, most interesting, best way is to come and participate in the Planapalooza, because, again, you can hear what other people think, whereas online you only get to see what you think. So let's talk. Thoughts, hopes, dreams, aspirations, fears, and concerns. We've got a microphone that's going to be circulated so that people at home can hear this. And is my mic back on?
Just a quick point of order on questions and comments. We want to make sure everybody gets a chance to ask a question or make a comment. Obviously, we can't necessarily be here for hours and hours to allow every single question. If everybody wanted to speak, we'd be here for another 2 hours. But we are going to have we do have comment cards out there as well. So if you don't get a chance to ask your question or make your comment tonight, we do encourage you to grab those comment cards and use those. Also, just want to make sure we be respectful of others tonight. Use kind words and be respectful of others, and but please share your thoughts and your questions as well. So, all right, we'll pass the mic around to whoever's.
I saw the peach shirt hand go up first, so yep, right. You pass her the mic.
Thank you. My name is Nancy Edwards. I live in an area of Gallatin that's it's classified as the variable mixed use, and reading through the plan, predominantly commercial. So, given that, my concern or my question is, when you're talking about drafting ordinance, you said draft ordinance, singular, not multiple. Mm-hmm. So, is the ordinance going to address all the zoning capabilities of under the city of Gallatin? And when that's being done, how is that going to get communicated afterwards when it's all done? Say a developer comes in, we want to apply to rezone this particular area. How do the residents in that particular area going to get notified of that application? Is there going to be a centralized website where you can say something goes out that says, hey, we've got somebody who wants to rezone this property? What's going to happen after that?
Yeah.
That type of thing.
So I'll start at the end. And please, anybody from the city jump in as well. But the notification process will be just sort of what the normal process is right now. There's requirements like state law regarding how people are notified as well. A lot of times, what we find though is when we go through a process like this, people become much more interested or aware of what's happening, and so you hopefully won't have a surprise, but. Even if you did happen to miss the notification, whatever the process is that they do here, you will not be surprised by the results because you participated in this process and you know what to expect for that zoning district. So we hope that as we go through, there won't be a bunch of rezonings after the fact because we are writing the zoning that is intentional, that kind of reflects the vision that we're coming up with and that is in the comp plan. And so as we go through that, unless somebody's just like, oh, well, yes, I know you just went through this lengthy public process and wrote this new zoning ordinance, but I think I'd like to do something different than that, which does happen. Hopefully they'll not be rezoning. They'll just follow the rules. The first part of the question, the ordinance. Yeah, so we are updating the zoning ordinance. And so, Brian, did you have any extra color to add to that?
It's does this
Yep.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
So it's a conglomeration of all of the ordinances that the city has currently combined into what we understand as the zoning ordinance. It may not be every ordinance that the city's ever adopted. We have a city code of the municipal code that we also have. So we will not be addressing every tiny thing that the city's ever adopted as part of their rules and regulations. But with respect to zoning rules and regulations, anything to do with that would be included in that.
Thank you.
So,
Who was
also,
that?
just
Her and then you.
just if I can clarify for the notifications, we did put some email signups out there. When you walked in the door, hopefully you signed in. We will be sending all the notifications of future public meetings and when these things will be occurring to anyone who signs up on this list. We want to make sure that you're informed. So as you come in and participate in these meetings, we will be adding your names to the list so that you can continue to be informed of what's coming up.
But that'll be, just to clarify, that'll be specifically to the zoning ordinance rewrite. That won't mean that every time somebody's doing a development or rezoning that
Correct.
the person who signed up there will get an email. So you'll still have to watch the normal way. So the white shirt in the back and then up here to the front to you. And if I miss you, I'm sorry. I'm terrible about figuring out whose hand went up first and all that. So.
Thank you. My name is Michelle Juvance, and I just had a question about the public process and the contributions. In the room tonight, there's a very heavy representation of the development and building community, which I suppose would probably be normal for these kind of meetings. I don't know.
No.
Oh,
Normally
well,
they are like not.
Oh, yeah. There's
so
a
I'm
lot.
glad to hear that they're here.
Very, very many are
That's
here
good.
tonight.
That's good.
So my question is, in the process where we're all contributing with this whole thing, like, do we specify like that we are a community member or we're a part of the development community, or to specify so that like what sort of opinions are being given and where they're coming from?
Yes, yeah. So we will, when we get into the Planapalooza, that's a great question. When we get into Planapalooza, when we have a series of technical meetings, different topics, technical meetings, and whenever we are in those, it's a very intimate forum, and we're talking about very specific things, and I'll have everybody go around and introduce themselves and say what their affiliation is, and just so-and-so citizen, so I'm here with so-and-so building group or whatever. So it is helpful to me, but also I try to be very careful about not weighting people's comments. Weighting, right? In that, this person is this, so therefore they get more of a say-so than someone else. But it is helpful to know, because then I understand if someone's concerned about something, what concern is usually caused by fear or apprehension of something, and so where does that come from? And it could be something that when I was a kid, our house was taken in a zoning issue or whatever, or I have a company that does this thing and it might have an impact, and so it is helpful. That's a great question. Thank you.
Got a couple of questions online, if I could.
Oh, please.
Patty Keisman says, so you've been hired by Gallatin to zone and develop the city?
No, absolutely not. Yeah, so, and it's funny because the TPUDC that he mentioned, Town Planning and Urban Design Collaborative, we were working in Chestertown, Maryland one time, and their newspaper there was known for doing like trying to make controversy. And so they intentionally called us Town Planning and Urban Development Collaborative. And I was like, oh my gosh. So no, there's no developing to be done. I mentioned at the beginning that part of some of our clients are private developers, none here by the way, but around the country. And so I would share that so nobody feels like we're being sneaky. But also, more importantly, it helps in our discussions like this because a lot of people who work on municipal projects, comprehensive plans or zoning codes, a lot of firms that don't do any development work. So they don't understand the perspective of like they're missing a big gap. They may be great at hearing what the community wants or whatever, and then they're like, come up with some big pie in the sky thing that doesn't work. Economically down the road. And so we bring our experience to bear in that regard. But no, we aren't developing anything. We're writing zoning ordinance on behalf of the city. We've been hired, our contractors with the city of Gallatin.
And one easy one, is this just for the city of Gallatin or for all of the Gallatin zip code?
Oh, Brian, I don't know the difference.
Okay, so it does include more than just, I'm sorry. The zoning ordinance itself only includes city limit property. Now, that being said, there may be properties within the county inside our urban growth boundary that someday get annexed and would be subject to the rules of the zoning ordinance, but not until such time as they would be annexed would they be subject to the ordinance.
And normally when somebody does an annexation, I guess it's the same here, you do a comprehensive plan amendment as part of that and then a zoning update? I mean, you rezone the property?
Not necessarily, because the comprehensive plan does incorporate those areas inside the urban growth boundary that are outside the city limits.
Okay.
So there is already a comprehensive plan for
So you
those
don't have to do
areas
a comp plan amendment. Okay.
prior to being annexed.
Good.
Yes.
Right here at the front.
I don't know how we started all the standing up thing, but
It's all right.
Renee Saunders, and I think I have a question and a comment. One, with respect to your issue, you had a slide on there that talked about zoning loopholes, and I don't know if it's actually a loophole or what, but after the community participates in all of this, and you get the ordinance taken care of and everybody votes on it, what assurances do we have that city council won't just continue to do what they're doing now? And I don't mean to be controversial at all, but what I mean is if we all get together and we talk about this place should only be zoned to do such and such, and this place should only be zoned to do such and such, and if I'm not speaking correctly,
You're right.
say it, then somebody comes in and slides a proposal to city council, and the city council says, oh, yeah, this seems reasonable, so why don't we just change the zoning here from R whatever to D whatever or whatever it is? We can't be assured that that won't happen in the future, right? After we go through all of this. And that is not necessarily a loophole, maybe.
Right.
It's just the way business is done.
Yeah, so that's a good question. So there is a normal process by which somebody can apply for rezoning that we can't undo. It's like in state statute, and they have the ability to request it. This question is asked in a lot of communities we work in, most, in fact. So one thing is, because there was a process by which the ordinance was created, hopefully with robust public input, the policymakers feel good about it, the results of it, right? This is what my constituents want. Also, because the development community was also a participant, they understand their input has been given, it's incorporated, all of those things. And so there isn't a need to go in and ask to do something different or to rezone. A lot of places we work have like a PUD process or something where it's like a negotiation and like, okay, well, we want to do a new development. We don't like any of the zoning districts that you have, so we want to do this other thing in planned unit development or whatever. What do they call it here? Same PUD? Yeah. And so a lot of places we work, it's like the normal thing, like actually the city council prefers it because it allows them to negotiate with the developer outside of what the normal zoning ordinance has. Well, that's great depending on who's elected at that moment. And it also makes it very, very unpredictable as to what's going to come out the other end of the negotiation. So many places we work, they actually do away with the PUD process. They're like, well, we have this new zoning ordinance and reflects all of these things, and it has something for everyone, and I don't know. And we had developers' input and builders and the community, so we don't need to have a big negotiated process like that. In fact, I guess Nolensville did away with their PUD process, which they were heavily reliant on up until the moment the new ordinance got adopted. The short answer to your question is there isn't one. There's no way you can preclude someone from applying for a rezoning. You just hope that you can create an ordinance that is so reflective of the desires of all groups that everyone's in favor of it. And you might ask to do maybe have a variance or some sort of a deviation from what it says, but you wouldn't necessarily feel the need to go and completely do a different zoning district than you end up in. And as we go through, we'll be making a new zoning map, and so we'll have discussions. So you may go like, yeah, I'm not sure if that zoning district's really reflective of where we are or where we want to be. And so we'll hear about something. A lot of what I always say is the detail about the zoning map is all at the edges, right? You got to get those edges right, and what this is in and that's out, and that makes sense. And so sometimes people say, oh, wow, this is really way better than my current zoning. And, I'm thinking about maybe selling one day or whatever. So can I be in that district next to me? And, some people say, take me out of that district. So I won't give as long answers for everything, I hope. But I try to just give you all as much information. I know Brian said we won't be here all night, and it's be my fault if we are. So I hadn't had dinner yet, so that's not.
There's cookies over there.
Yeah, I saw that. I'm trying to stay away.
Karen Bookout. Given that there is such a heavy presence of developers, and you will find as you go through this process that there will continue to be a heavy presence of developers and realtors. And with that in mind, what I'd like to know is you made the comment that you don't weigh input. You don't weigh the community over the developer and so on and so forth. And I realize you can't police the city council. So I guess my question is a two-part question. Have you ever, in your experience, put together a plan and then find that the city council just, this is not what we want to do because we have our own plans, and, this is how we're going to work out, we're going to continue to work in this manner. And the second part of my question is, if you're not weighing comments, how do you honor or respect the comments, the input from the community, especially in a community who has not been heard?
Yeah, good questions. No, we haven't been to a place where they said, you know what, I heard this whole public process and all these people participated and we're going to do something totally different. We've not had that. Now, I think part of that is just because of the way we conduct ourselves and our process, right? It just would be really, really weird if that happened, right? There will be things that, may end up getting adjusted from the first draft we present that really sort of most fully represents everything we heard until the adopted draft. Usually I find that it's not some sinister motives. It's just simply like, okay, well, we heard from, I'll give an example, another community. The town manager showed us a spreadsheet that said, here's what our tax base is, and we need to make sure that this thing can happen. Therefore, we need to tweak that thing, right? It wasn't like a massive thing. And we're like, well, it's a bummer. It's not ideal, but, and everyone said, well, we understand, that at least there's a reason for it. It's not just cause, or just because my friend wanted to do something different. So, our robust process typically helps as best you can that. The waiting, what I find is it's really interesting. Even when we get to, for whatever reason, get to work in a lot of places that are sort of very, half the people are growth and half are no growth. And when we do the process, especially that mapping exercise that I talked about at the hands-on workshop, the way that we do it is we'll break up into groups around the table, and each group will sort of brainstorm and come up with, and then each group will present to everyone else what they came up, what their big ideas were. And after you get, I hate to just kind of like give away the secrets, but after you get to about the third group, people start saying, well, they said most of what we were going to say, but here's this other thing that they didn't say yet. It's really, really surprising how similar people are in the things that are important to them and what they're wanting. And so that's why part of the reason that our process isn't just, I'm going to show up tonight and then I'm going to show up another night, a few months from now, and another night a few months from now. When we come for the Codapalooza, it's multiple days. We'll be staying here. We'll have our office set up across the street, I think. And people can drop in all the time and come and go, and it's a very different. So I can really get a sense of what people really want. There will be times when somebody might say, hey, can I talk to you kind of over there, a little quieter? Because I've got this thing I'm pursuing, a development opportunity, and it's not something that I can just broadcast, because then next thing you know, this land's going to cost twice as much or whatever, So there are times when we kind of have to be discreet, but I work really, really hard to, and in fact, I'm like, you can have 5 minutes, but I'm not going to go take a special meeting with you because you have a lot of land or whatever. And so, sometimes that's what I mentioned earlier, those uncomfortable conversations we'll have through this process. And, some communities will say that, I'm just this parroting back what you say in your comprehensive plan, you do talk about this idea of character and walkable and some of these mixed-use ideas. Well, some developers think that that's awesome. And that's, in fact, all they do. And others think that's terrible because that's not at all what I do. And so there will be, some discussions about that, how that can work. We were working in one community where they wanted all new development to have mixed use of some sort, even if it was just a little neighborhood center with a coffee shop and a, hair salon or whatever. And another place, they said, we really love that, but we're not willing to go that far because it's just not for everybody in the development community. But we are willing to require a mix of different housing types in the development so that it isn't that repeated thing that I talked about before. And so there's ways to dial it in that can work. Some places they can just ask a developer anything they want because it's just so desirable and the land values are so high that they'll do anything to be there. And other places, they're just happy to have somebody taking an interest in their community. So we'll work it out together, but that's the best I got for now. Hopefully that helps. So, got a mic back there.
Thank you, ma'am. Pascal Jovans, Gallatin Councilman District 3. So, go back to, you mentioned Plan Gallatin, and you're going to, sorry if I misquote you, but you say you're going to use it to kind of found the base of the zoning code, but I was part of Plan Gallatin, and I was not really happy with what I was made with. And a lot of my constituents were not happy of what I was made to. And I don't think that did reflect really the public input. So my question here is that you say you're going to look at it. Are you going to come back with comments on that with the new zoning code and expectation? Come back and tell us, yeah, we look at that place, that area of Plan Gallatin, and we don't think that's going to fit with what we want to do zoning, and give us some input in that.
Yeah. So that's great. The one thing to note is, I didn't say this a minute ago, but part of the process of the Planapalooza, that sort of dynamic real-time discussion isn't just us having meetings and things. We will actually be, I'm going to have enough people there that will be, as we hear something from the community, we'll be sketching and testing out an idea, and we'll be, brainstorming on things. And so at the closing presentation of the Planapalooza, we'll actually present like all the work that we've done during those days. We'll present the things we heard, and then some of here's what we think that we can do with what we heard in the direction and how that can relate to the zoning. And then at that moment, we'll have a Q&A like this, and we'll stay here just chatting. And you all will say, okay, yes, I know Plain Gallatin said that. However, but we'll talk about Plain Gallatin through the process too. So it's not like we're going to sort of blindly follow it. I do want to ask, though, Brian, sort of state statute and how it, what the requirements are for the comp plan to sync up with the zoning and all of that stuff. Because like in Franklin, they didn't adopt their comp plan. They just they recommended. What? Planning Commission adopted it, but the BOMA, Board of Mayor and Aldermen, didn't. And so so you did here, right? So Brian, state statute, talk about that.
From my understanding, at least, if it is an adopted comprehensive plan, our charge is to implement that comprehensive plan through the zoning ordinance. And so we're doing our best to set up the rules and regulations within the zoning ordinance as we go through this process to basically further the goals and the desires of that plan.
The question is how much, obviously the comp plan has, I showed those goals or whatever. Well, can we stop there? Or do we have to go to the next level or to the next level? Because if I understand it correctly, there's, so maybe one area in particular that people, weren't necessarily all on board with how it was dealt with in the comp plan, maybe more areas, but one that might pop into your mind. And so one of the things that we'll do through the process, without belaboring it and having it take over the whole process, is to hear what are some of the things that may have been objectionable, and then we can say, well, okay, great. A lot of times what we find is, because you all have normal lives and normal jobs and maybe don't do this kind of stuff all the time, is that you go, okay, well, I don't like this thing. I think it should be done in a different way. But what I always say is everyone is only limited by their experience, right? And so the thing that I just mentioned earlier with the whole agri-hood thing, may have never heard of that. You may have thought, wow, that sounds really cool. I would have never thought of that, right? And so if I hear what some of the concerns were through the process, then we can start to say, okay, well, maybe it's actually not a problem. In fact, the zoning could address it in this way, and it actually is a win-win. But when you are assuming the potential outcome of the thing that you didn't like through the comp plan process is to be this, then it could be concerning. So we'll need to understand more about it as we go, but you have my word that it will be open, but we will also be bound insofar as we are by the state. Now, that's, I'm sure, I as an outsider, I can say this. I hate to say it, so anybody who's here who's involved in the process, please don't kick me out as a result of it. But, there is a process by which a comprehensive plan can be amended. It's not normal to be amended this soon, by the way, though. So I'm not recommending it. I'm just saying, as you go, like one of the things that you'll see is when you put a new zoning ordinance in place, you might want to test it out for a little while to see how things go. And then you go, oh, well, let's do a code cleanup, some people call it, a zoning code cleanup. So if we can't get to the bottom of what the concern is, which is not typical for us, we usually can get to it and come up with some good solutions for you all, then we'll think about what's next after that. So, who has the mic? Or who has a question? How about that? Now you have the mic.
Thank you. I have a few questions. If it's for just the downtown city of Gallatin or all of Gallatin?
All.
And you can't change anything that's already been done, am I correct?
No. We can change everything.
on why y'all were not here around 3-4 years ago and get started.
Well, I know.
It has nothing to do with just downtown Gallatin, am I right?
Correct. It's the whole thing.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
So. Who's next? Yes, ma'am. Go for it.
Okay, but I do have a question. I think what all the people that are here in the blue shirts, and we've all been coming for the last year and a half, and we've had very discouraging experience with feeling very strongly about things and then coming to meetings. And I'm astounded that every week this land's being annexed over here, and this is over here, and this is over here. So then what starts happening is it's not just close in, then you fill donut holes. Then you go out because this person wants to sell. Well, we can't demand, like it sounds great what you're talking about. The builders that we're getting in for these neighborhoods, I was a realtor for 20 years. No, I'm sorry some of you are here. Some of these are not top crop. I've sold some of these homes. We're not getting the cream of the crop. We're not getting the people that would do those kind of neighborhoods. So I think what's so hard for everyone is I've been here my whole life. And we are losing. You see all the ads about Gallatin and the lakes and the streams and the fields and the rolling hills. And then you see a neighborhood made. The streets are straight. They're lined up like 10 soldiers. The land's flattened. It's happening everywhere out where I live. And it makes me so upset to see how the whole place looks different. So I think you have a steep, I think what you're saying tonight sounds great. But I think in reality, you can set all this up, and then we'll come to a council meeting in a year and a half, and they'll go, oh, but this person wants to do this. So, we're just going to amend that, and we're going to do something different.
Yeah.
So I don't know if I want to invest another year of my life, because I've been coming here every Tuesday night, and I'm getting really weary of it, because I'm hoping, like I wish you had been here years ago. But it's just very discouraging.
Yeah.
So anyway, thank you
Thanks.
for being here, and you can do a miracle.
Well, and I'll tell you that we call that planning fatigue, right? And so and especially when you're trying to protect something, right? And you care about it, and you keep pushing and trying to show up. I will say this: at least stick through this part, because this is the last of it, right? So you do your comp plan, your high level vision, all that stuff. We're making the rules and regulations, and so if you stay home and don't participate, you've missed the last chance to give that input. So it's hard for me sometimes, because I always have an idea of like, oh, wouldn't it be great? I have all these ideas, right? Wouldn't it be great at this and that, and then the whole thing doesn't happen. I'm like, oh man, that's a bummer. What a shame. And then I have somebody give me a moment of perspective, and they say, for you, if you hadn't been involved in this, it would have been worse than it was. And so even if you can only make it slightly better or slightly more in what you've envisioned, stick with it, and let's see, so.
Grab a couple of questions online. One is Rosemary Bates mentioned, for the people watching online, how do they get on the email notification list? This is our first meeting. We do have an email list that we send out to about 7,000 residents. Contact the mayor's office if you would like to get on that list. Otherwise, it'll be posted on our social media. You'll see it there.
And is there a way for them to sign up on the webpage too, I think? Can they go the...
Yes.
I don't know.
Yes, so the web page, when you want to go onto the web page and make a comment, it tells you need to register your information, and then you'll be able to make any comment.
Right, and then you'll be on the list, if you will.
Correct.
Someone asked similar question we've heard already from Andrea Keating. Do developers who do not live in Gallatin have a say or input on the zoning? I would assume, do people residents outside of Gallatin or non-residents, will they have a chance to do input? Will we separate those people?
We don't normally separate them. Normally everybody comes, it's actually not. You might be surprised. We don't get that many people from other communities, even if they have a business interest. It's kind of rare. But when they do, we don't separate. They just identify themselves as such, and hopefully the people from here will still be nice. So, any more?
One last one. I'm going to shorten and get right to the question at the end. This is from Rob Horton. How do you keep the process from being hijacked by those in opposition to growth and end up with a zoning ordinance that works for all constituents?
Yeah, interesting. It's the same question from the other end, right? There we go. The process is working, right? So magic. So the same answer as I gave before, really. It's just like, giving everybody an opportunity to come share their thoughts and their concerns. And one thing I will say, if anybody is in the development or building industry in the room here, it sounds like you are, like, it doesn't help if you don't say anything, right? So we know that people who have matching T-shirts always will say something, right? That's part of when we get matching shirts and we say something, right? Great. A lot of times we'll have people in the room and they'll just be sort of sitting back listening, and we don't get their input. And I don't blame you. I get it. A lot of times you show up at a planning commission hearing or whatever, and people are there, same people who are at the table during the process, they're the Planapalooza maybe, and they're saying, I hate your project. And we all, as long as everybody's being nice to each other, it's all right. And we just got to hear that. Got to hear what your concerns are, what your issues are. Because one way or the other, we're going to have a zoning ordinance update at the end of this. And what you hear is we don't want a bunch of surprises when it comes to adoption. And it isn't what everybody talked about. So we need everybody to be transparent. So. Yes, ma'am. You got a mic? Oh, you got a mic.
My name's Jim Hazard. I may have missed it, but when you go through your process, input from everybody, who has the final say when you're done? Your proposal.
Sure.
Before
so
it becomes an ordinance.
The first draft.
Planning guy? No. The final
Brian.
Planning guy, the mayor, the council.
Yeah. Well, let me walk you through the process a little bit. So the first draft will be just our take on what we've heard, right? That will go to a planning guy, and then he'll make sure, like I said, we didn't do anything wacky, right? It's not for him to edit and censor it and all that. It's just like, oh, yeah, what is this about a space needle in the town square, right? Oh, we thought that was really important. That person was so passionate, and they had a shirt, So he'll, do that. But then that public draft will come out, and everyone will get an opportunity to give input. Now, that's where it gets tricky, right? Because you may give input and you may say, oh, well, this zoning district in the purple color, like, I think the setback should be something different than it is. Usually people don't have that fine grain of a comment, but let's just pretend you did. And then, now he's got to look and he's like, well, gosh, 5 other people gave comments and said they think that it is good, or it should be something even different than this other person said. And so part of that, the concerns that get addressed during the questions that are submitted, we have to kind of distill through the lens of what we heard big picture, holistically. And then he will give us the edits from the community to say, implement these. And then we say, wait a minute. And we will say, wait a minute, that's not what everybody said. What's up with that? Or hopefully we probably won't have to. I'm saying we're not afraid to, right? And then as we go through the process, it has to go. It's like this is all pre the normal process, right? The normal process, it goes to, I guess, the commissions and councils and whatever. You have your whole adoption process. So that will all have its own normal, formal input process as well. So this is all in an effort to get it right before it shows up. This is your council in here, up there, and so yeah.
That's all I need.
Yeah.
With the unelected guy or the elected guys?
Oh, it's ultimately elected. Yes. Back to you. Mike.
Hold on one second.
The name of the website.
And it's funny, somebody online said the same. I don't have that link directly, but tomorrow we will post this whole presentation on our social media, and we'll have a link to the web page that we created.
Okay.
And I'll shorten that link.
Okay.
The city's social media,
ZoCo,
Facebook,
Gallatin.
YouTube. Then call the mayor's office tomorrow, and I'll help you get there.
But
We can repeat that. It was ZoCoGallatin.com. ZoCo Gallatin.com.
That.
Very good.
ZoCo Gallatin. Yes.
Okay, so first of all,
That mic's not on.
okay. Push it up.
Okay, so thank you for being here. And thank you to Brian for inviting you in. You've stepped into a hornet's nest, and you've probably done that before.
Love that.
Which is fine. Just so that you know what kind of a hornet's nest you're in the middle of and being swarmed by everybody. The challenge with Gallatin is that there has been so much growth that has adversely affected other areas. So our roads suck. We have potholes everywhere. We have stop and go traffic, congestion, all hours. It starts at 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon, and we're a suburban community. Traffic congestion should not start in the middle of the afternoon and go to the middle of the morning, okay? What Gallatin does affects the county because the county is responsible for the schools. We have developments that are coming in and literally trees. You had your little picture of the trees. They're just wiped clean. There was a beautiful road out off of St. Blaise and had trees, overgrowth on both sides of the road. And one day the trees were there. The next day on one side, absolutely wiped down. And people see that, and it hurts. It literally hurts them to see those trees. And there's so what I would like to see, and maybe you can kind of clarify the process, what can we do to make sure that there is tighter control on trees that have to stay or trees that have to be replaced, that we have water permeable concrete for some of these things? There's all sorts of new technology that is not being used, but it's the consequences and the lack of foresight that has people coming for a year and a half, and when they try to make those ideas and suggestions, they are basically patronized and ignored. I mean, it's kind of like, we're just going to pat you on the head and thank you so much for your comments, and then going to rubber stamp and do what we want to do. So what kind of parameters are there for when we're doing rezoning and all of this other planning? How deep can the city get into, you tear down one tree, you got to plant 5? You scrape this ground, you've got to have, certain areas where, because one of the things, if you look at Plan Gallatin, it's 10 football fields of land that we're losing every year. They know this. 10 football fields, and they're rubber stamping and keep doing it. We've just had 2 major flooding incidents because the water has nowhere to go now. So, and the people who have been impacted, one of my friends has been impacted by these flooding events in the last month or so, and they can't clear out the creek behind them that's flooding. My niece had a new development go in behind her, and they started getting flooding. So what's being allowed to be created, and this is not necessarily from the developers because they're just doing what they're allowed to do. We've got to make sure that people are responsible for the adverse consequences of things that are being done. Right now, nobody's accountable. The city says, well, we can't use taxpayer dollar to help an individual citizen. So if they get flooded, too bad. But they can't. But the citizens can't fix it. And we're not going to make the developers and the new development behind these people fix it. So what's the solution? We're growing faster than we will take ownership for and responsibility for, and we've got to be able to address it realistically. So how does this process help build in that accountability and responsibility?
Sure. So we will, a zoning ordinance can cover, anything that it needs to as long as the state and federal, statutes allow it. I was just actually commenting yesterday on my neighborhood in Franklin, where it is, 20-something years old now, and it feels like it's heavily forested because all the street trees and trees that put in the park, and they saved the old tree rows between the farms that it used to be. But where there wasn't a tree row was pasture. And so it actually is way more forested than it was before it was developed. when someone's developing an area that is woodland, it's much more obvious, because then they cut down the trees and it's not pasture, and so it changed. But there are things that you can do, in the regulations that have requirements for, like you said, if you cut down something, you have to replace and all that. So we have to just understand first what the things are that are making you all concerned about development. And so in those topical meetings during the Planapalooza and through this, and you can go online and put them in there on the webpage, because that may be an easy sort of bullet point. So we're ready, when we come to the Planapalooza, we're like, oh, we've seen here all the things that make you not happy about new development. And so we can start to address them, but we have to name them first as we go. The other thing is, a lot of times, the idea of conservation or preservation is it's built or it's not, right? And so if you're in favor of preservation or conservation, you're pushing for it to not be development on something, which obviously from a builder's perspective or developer's perspective doesn't work, right? Or for the landowner who was, like I said earlier, counting on selling it to somebody, it doesn't work for them to not develop. So how do we create a win-win scenario in which case you can have development that you are happy with? That's why I mentioned specifically that whole agrihood thing. That's not the answer for everything, by the way. It's just a kind of a fun-sounding thing that is easy to conceive of or picture. But there are ways where the idea of conservation and the way that we do it here in the U.S. is different than around the rest of the world. The rest of the world is, like raw nature is not the sort of end goal typically. But they also have a tradition of building densely where they do build and have a distinct edge and then starts farm and forest. We don't do that as much in the U.S., right? And so some places we're working are considering this sort of more of a European model for new development, European in its form, I mean, and which could be, you can imagine quite lovely, but, may seem not of this place. And so how do we figure out a strategy that works for the development community as well? The one thing I will say to anybody who's in the development community here in the room is, if we're looking for a win-win, it isn't really fair to say we can't change what we do. We have our model, and this is all we do, right? It's not really a sort of a give and take, right? And so if we're asking people who are concerned about growth, because there are plenty of communities who the concern about growth is the prevailing sentiment and does rule the day when it comes to voting on projects. That may not be the case now, or sometimes it's just people's perspective on whether or not it's the case. But it may not be the case tomorrow or in the future. And so if we're saying we only do this thing, one of our private development projects, I'll get going. Sorry, Brian, tell me when it's time for dinner. One of our private development projects, we're working, the landowner, it's this beautiful historic farm, old dairy farm. And before they hired us to do this really cool village concept, mixed use and mixed housing types and all these things, they had put part of the property under contract with a workforce housing apartment developer. And workforce housing is needed in nearly every community we work in fact. And so, but that developer had a model. And they were like, no, we can't do something that's different or fits in better or whatever. And I mean, they swore up and down. And I'm like, I'm working for them too, and for the landowner, right? And it wasn't until the city planner said, there's no way you're going to get this project approved if you keep trying to do that in that way. And then they said, okay, fine, I guess we can do something different. What do we do, Brian? And I drew something different for them. And they're like, okay, that works. And it was just like, gosh, it didn't have to be that hard. Now, obviously, it would have been easier for them if they just got to do the same thing they always do. So I tell that story, at running the risk of alienating people in the building community who are uninterested in changing their model if they happen to be in this room. But there is a way you can do it. And in fact, there's a way that you can do it and possibly make more money than you currently make and make everyone happy that they're getting development and you don't have to fight. So, yes.
Brian, I just am going to say, I think this will be our last question. I know we want to be respectful of all your time, and we've already been here an hour and a half. So please, if you didn't get a chance to ask your question or make a comment, grab those comment cards. We'll be here for a little bit afterwards to talk to you and answer any questions in person if you want to as well. But we thank you so much, and go ahead with your question.
One thing I'll say before you go, at the Planapalooza, we start at 9 in the morning and we're there till 7 at night. So you can come in as long as you want. And usually when we do the presentations and stuff, like I always say, I'll sit here as long as you want to. And we have 24/7 access to wherever we are. Sometimes we don't. But so anyway, this isn't your last chance if anybody didn't get to answer their questions. So.
Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So through this process, who's responsible for making a determination of no historic properties affected?
Brian?
Ask that one more time. Historic properties?
Yes. Who's responsible for making a determination of no historic properties affected under the Historic Act?
I mean, I think it would be all of us together just working on what those regulations, where known historic properties or districts may be. We are still looking at, keeping and implementing the historic district overlays that we currently have. Historic buildings that may be on the National Register of Historic Places, but may not be within a historic district, are less easy to regulate in that manner because we wouldn't necessarily have historic regulations that would affect them. And the National Register designation doesn't necessarily prohibit someone from changing one of those buildings. I don't know if that's...
Well, there is a Preservation Act under the federal law that does.
Yeah, Dad, do you have anything to add to that? Because, we work in some, Portsmouth, New Hampshire, and they claim they were founded in 1622 or something. I don't know. And this actually didn't come up. Your microphone.
Maybe two answers. There's a state statute that Tennessee state statute that governs historic districts and historic district commissions and designations of historic district property. Then the city is not the party that can enforce the federal regulation. So that's not a thing. But the city can't. They also can't adopt any sort of ordinance that's contrary to the federal ordinance, the federal regulation. So that's another piece of it. I just my brief look so far at the historic district commission stuff that's in your current zoning looks like it complies with the Tennessee state statute, and there's no reason that can't be enforced. And I'm hoping maybe we'll get to talk to people who have contact with the historic district commission so that they can kind of help us through whatever the concerns are.
I think the short answer we always say when it comes to this or flooding or whatever, anything that's a federal statute supersedes what we're doing in the zoning ordinance, and so it's so we don't address it really, except for to say that we know that that's higher. So, right.
Sure.
Great. Okay. Well, this was great. Thank you. Hopefully next time you'll bring me a shirt too. And then the developers can wear their shirts, but make sure you color coordinate. And we'll see you all before too long. Thank you for your input.
Thank you so much for everyone.